iPredict works by gathering the knowledge of its 5,000 plus traders. If a stock has a price of 57 cents, that means the market thinks that event has a 57% chance of happening. If you agree, you buy. If you disagree, you short. And if you're right, you make money.
Kia ora, good evening New Zealand. This is day 3 until the country goes to the polls. Welcome to iPredict Election 2011, the most accurate source of political and economic information in New Zealand broadcasting. Our 3 predictions tonight. Prediction 1, the iPredict market are predicting 48% National Party vote, much lower than the mainstream landline polls. Can National live up to the hype? Prediction 2, the iPredict market are predicting 28% Labour Party vote, higher than the mainstream media landline polls, but could Labour melt down? Prediction 3, who will the Greens support or abstain on confidence and supply? The market gives a Green National probability 16% and gives a Green Labour probability only 5%. To dissect these predictions, let me introduce tonight's panel. Here's New Zealand's answer to Ted Kennedy, the great Liberal lion of New Zealand political punditry, CEO of the Howard League for Penal Reform, Mike Williams, and here's the political columnist for the National Business Review, the moral shepherd of the right, Matthew Hooton. Welcome to you both. We'll also wrap the show with a final prediction, but let's kick things off with tonight's first market prediction. At 48%, the market are predicting National are far lower than the mainstream media landline polls are predicting. Mike, so gagging the news media with the police, ramming through more legislation under a misuse of urgency than any other party in modern political history, Benny bashing, asset sales, and borrowing $2 billion for tax cuts for the rich gets you 48% of the party vote. New Zealanders don't want a government, they want a crypto police state, don't they?
I don't know if I'd place that interpretation on it, and I'd be pretty jumpy about that 48%. I mean, all the others are saying National do somewhat better than that. And I would point out that this is an odd kind of a poll. It actually costs you money to participate.
Yep. So
you're not going to get too many down-at-heel Labour supporters chucking money into that. But it's interesting, and who knows?
Do you think that National have the ability to get 3% higher than their 45% in 2008? That was considered a political high tide mark.
Yeah, that would be unusual. It's quite unusual for a party to score more in a subsequent election than it did. Although I'd have to say that, you know, John Key is a very well-produced product.
Yep. And
he's maintained a powerful attraction. I think Matthew told me the other day, 70% support in the polls. That doesn't seem to have twitched much after Cuppergate, so who knows?
Do you think, though, that the 250,000 Labour Party voters who didn't vote in 2008 stayed at home, do you think Labour have done enough to bring them across and vote in 2011?
They have certainly tried very hard to do that. And Matthew will tell you about some shock horror advertising they've been doing out in South Auckland and in the West, very closely targeted stuff. I just don't know. The interesting thing about that group of people, as I discovered through analysing them and getting to know them over 5 years, is they are in every sense unpollable.
Right.
They do not have landlines where somebody rings them. They've got a landline in the house that someone has paid for rather than them. They refuse to take part.
Right.
They are socially conservative, so a lot of them stayed home because of the don't smack your kids and the civil union legislation. But, you know, Phil Goff has got a powerful argument for low-income people to come out and vote. They're getting $10 a week extra for the $5,000 tax-free zone. They're getting $6 or $7 a week off their GST when GST comes off fresh fruit and vegetables. And if you're on the minimum wage, then that's another $40 or $50 a week.
So those kitchen table issues matter to that electorate?
Well, let's see.
Right,
they could just as easily stay home and again.
Sure. Matthew, is National soaring so high because they've played such a clean campaign, minus any of the pamphlet scaremongering Labour have embarked upon in the last week?
Yeah, I think you have to look at this as a 5-year project by John Key to restore trust in the National Party.
Yes.
Under Don Brash, the National Party ran some very forthright campaigns, Iwi Kiwi and so forth. Prior to that, the Bolger government had misled the public, broke its promises, and before that there was the lunacy of Muldoon. And what John Key did in his very first speech when he became leader of the National Party, it was at Birkenhead, and it was a bit embarrassing because Don Brash was in the audience. He broke with the recent past. He said, there were a few things he said. He endorsed the anti-nuclear policy, finally ended that issue. There was a line in it that he said, Maori are tangata whenua of New Zealand, and that's a fact, and there's no point in arguing it.
So the National Party came into the 21st century.
And he dealt with those things, and he said, I'll always tell you the truth. And he talked about his own upbringing, he talked about the underclass, he introduced those issues. And it is true to say that what he has done is, over 5 years, been presented a softer National Party in a policy sense. And the other thing he's done is placed an absolute premium on telling the truth. And I think that is to our policy detriment to some extent. The classic example is the superannuation promise, the 65, where John Key's position, in my opinion, is ridiculous.
Well, hang on a minute, there's also,
And he's
won't
kept that
put
promise.
GST up.
Well, there was also those issues.
He said he wouldn't put GST up. Anyway, that was a tax which he would defend his position on that. But on most of those things, what he's said he'll do, he's done, and nothing more. And I think people can believe that the things that he's saying he'll do in his second term, including some unpopular things like the 49% share issues, he will do, but he won't do anything he hasn't said in advance. And that's, I think, why he's polling so well. Plus, people like him, and he has very high people skills.
Question of both of you. The TV3 Worm suggests that undecided voters will lean towards opposition parties. How will the idea of a National Party majority impact their votes?
That's actually quite interesting because John Key in the last little while has actually started beginning to predict a majority National Party, and that was a kiss of death to Helen Clark in 2002, I think. You've got to be careful about that. People distrust single party governments. But getting back to the Worm, I don't actually think the Worm favours opposition parties. I think they were rewarding a good performance by Phil Goff. Now, it may be that they were surprised by his good performance, but it was a good performance. I mean, I sat in a room with 5 or 6 people of all political complexions, and all of them agreed that Phil Goff actually won that debate.
Hands down.
And I think that, you know, it may have been the element of surprise that that he did that helped, but I was staggered afterwards when the panel sitting
Paul
there.
Henry, look, where was he coming from?
Well, he's a former National Party candidate, but I think that gave a lift to Phil Goff's campaign, and what he had to do was really lift his own people, because you know, if you've got a segment of your voters Labor has which sometimes doesn't vote, then organisation is crucially important. And
do you think that the Worm was a reminder to us? I mean, I had a look at the National Party Facebook page as an example. They've only got 1,100 supporters on their Facebook page. But John Key has over 60,000 supporters. Was the Worm a reminder that while we like John Key because of his personality, he's a nice bloke or what have you, there was still a deep resentment towards National Party policy, isn't there?
Well, you know, as we talked about in this program earlier, I think the Worm is stupid.
Socialist Worm?
Well, it turned out that way. There were people who were undecided between Labor and Mana.
Right?
So there you go. I mean,
well, they're deeply undecided. They don't know where to go, right?
And, you know, so I think it's a stupid thing. But anyway, I think the thing at home was even more stupid.
Yes.
I think the media have not sensationalised the Worm. They haven't sort of declared it's definitive. But I agree.
The honeymoon with John Key continues.
Yeah. Well, no. I think everyone agrees that Phil Goff did a fantastic job in that debate. He was on form. It was the sort of Phil Goff that if people had seen that Phil Goff for 3 years,
but
he
Matt,
might
didn't you
be
think
winning.
John Key was uncharacteristically flat?
He had a bad day on TV.
But we've discussed John Key many times on this show and his ability to be this brilliant performer when he's in front of a crowd. And you can see him actually feed on the energy. And he has this amazing comedic timing. We have a show pony for a Prime Minister. But when in a studio, in the sterile sort of environment of a studio, he fell flat. He didn't have that energy.
Well, I think Matthew's quite right. He just had a bad day. But what you're looking at is an exceptionally well-produced package in John Key. A friend of mine who's a stylist, works in the movie industry, said she doesn't trust anyone whose tie is never a millimetre wrong. And you have a look at John Key. His tie is never a millimetre away from perfectly positioned. And that tells you a lot about the man. You know, I'd respect him.
That's a big thing to vote on.
But
Same with Barack Obama, same with Thatcher, same with, Murray McCulley always looks dishevelled. He's saying you trust him more
Yeah,
than...
in some ways I do. Yeah.
John Key certainly looks like he's worth more than 50 million.
He ties
doesn't
his tie properly.
He
Wow.
certainly looks like he's worth more than 50 million, doesn't he?
Yeah, he may well be. Who knows?
A question to both of you. At 48% party vote, would you buy because National will get higher, or short because National will crash below 48%? Do you think
Oh,
they're get higher or
that's a
lower?
very interesting. Polls in general overstate the centre-right vote and
Yep.
understate the centre-left vote, with some strange exceptions. I have never seen a poll accurately predict Winston's vote.
Right.
It always understates it. And recent history in both Australia and New Zealand suggests the Green vote will be overstated.
Yep.
But that's what makes elections so exciting.
Yep.
These things are rough predictions. There was an election in Spain 6 years ago where it turned around in the last day of the election and the Socialists won, and that's because a bomb went off in the Madrid underground. So, anything can happen.
Okay, so saving bombs going off. Where do you say 40? Because you've been claiming 50% for a long time.
48 to 50. The Dominion poll this morning says 54. I don't trust polls.
No.
I think I do believe that there is that small landline bias that you're so. I'm not as paranoid about it as you are, but I think it exists. I think it's probably worth about 2 points.
Yep.
And I think about 50 rather than 54. But at 48, I think that's appropriately priced.
You're
for
holding?
iPredict.
You're holding?
I hold at 48.
You're holding
That's
at
about
48?
right.
You're
Hold
holding at 48. Thank you, panel. Let's move on to prediction 2. The iPredict market are predicting 28% Labor Party vote, higher than the mainstream media landline polls, but could Labor melt down? Mike, the David Farrar and Whale Oil hard right blog fantasy is that the Labor Party vote is in meltdown. But didn't the much stronger Gough debating a very rattled Key on TV3 mean that Gough's done enough to keep Labor above 30%?
I think that's probably right. I don't think they've plumbed the 20% depth that Bill English did in 2002, where he was seen as completely irrelevant. I think Labor's actually had quite a strong campaign, and I said on Q&A that if I'd have been planning and executing that campaign, I can't really think of anything I would have done much differently. I think they will make gains in the polls in this last week because John Key has actually had a bad week. He had a bad debate. He looked very flat. Then we had the news yesterday that we've got the highest exodus to Australia in the history of New Zealand, and the population's actually dropping. That's not good news. It was probably better news for him today that Judge Winkleman refused to release the tapes that sort of subtracts that issue for the last few days. If she'd have released them, then that would have completely overwhelmed the media for the last 2 or 3 days, which I think is probably a good thing for Labor that she didn't choose to decide the conversation was not private. So, there's still a bit of water to go under the bridge, and people always forget in New Zealand we've actually got 3 choices. Vote left, vote right, or not vote at all. And what is interesting is I had news from a Labor Party organiser yesterday that the actual pre-election turnout appears to be much higher.
Really?
Yes, than previously. Now that's just their scrutiny is, and we'll get some numbers on that, and you'll see the first thing on election night, what happens at 7 o'clock, of course, is those pre-election polls.
That's right.
Votes are all counted starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're dumped into the system, and that should give you a good idea. Certainly I went and voted today in Te Atatu, and I talked to the DRO there, and she said, oh yeah, there's many more doing early votes than last time.
That is bloody
So
interesting.
I don't know what that means, but it certainly means, I think there's some sort of undercurrent running that the polls aren't picking up, but I don't know what it is.
Matthew, if Phil manages to poll Labor above 30%, would Labor replace him, or has he earned a second shot?
I don't think he will go over 30. I don't think he'll be as low as 26.
Okay.
I back the iPredict number. I think 28 sounds to me about right. But yes, I agree with Mike. I think Phil Gough has run an excellent campaign. He is a person with a huge history. He's been in Parliament since 1981. He was one of the youngest ever cabinet ministers when he was one of Roger Douglas and David Longie's lieutenants in the 1980s. He was Minister of Employment that had to deal with that massive increase in unemployment. He was Minister of Education that introduced student fees.
Yep.
He introduced or tried to introduce the student loan scheme. I think he did fantastic work in Helen Clark's government, especially negotiating the free trade agreement with China.
Yep.
And in this campaign, he's done some bold and important things in those categories. He's done, you know, the capital gains tax idea. That's fantastic that that's now on the agenda. The superannuation promise to raise the age of eligibility is good. I think he's run a professional campaign around the stop asset sales.
But sub 30,
issue.
you think he'd be cut?
Well, I don't think any of the Labour contenders are more credible than him.
But they're ambitious.
They're ambitious, and we are seeing this jockeying. There's the two factions.
Yep.
There's the David Shearer, David Parker faction, and the one that Trevor Mallard is pushing forward is Grant Robertson, Jacinda Ardern ticket as a way of rejuvenating. I actually think I'd go with Shearer Parker. I don't think that Grant and Jacinda are ready just yet.
But if it's plus 30, he's earned a second shot.
Well, I think he's earned a second shot anyway, especially after that debate performance. I don't think it's going to be 21. I think it'll be 28, and Labour would be mad. I mean, David Cunliffe is not going to do a better job over the next 6 months of managing Labour through what will be probably a difficult time for them than Phil Goff. Phil Goff, they should stick with him.
Quick question to both of you. How will Labour regenerate after this election? How do they regenerate?
Well, my advice to them is to take a long holiday, win or lose. I mean, it's conceivable that there is the kind of messy result Matthew plays with in his head where there is some kind of a majority for Labour.
Not ruled out at all. Not ruled out
Maori. At all. I think probably, I'm going to make one prediction here. I think special votes will actually have a considerable effect on the result. I think it'll be that dicey. But if I was in the Labour Party, and if, as is predicted, there's a loss, I would not do anything about the leadership until the first caucus in February.
Right,
very good advice.
And I would have plenty. I think one of the mistakes about replacing Helen Clark with Phil Goff is it was done overnight.
That's right.
And
that's right.
You know, there wasn't
in the cabinet room. It didn't even go to the caucus.
Well, it did go to the caucus. I mean, I was in the
to
caucus.
be rubber stamped.
It was. Helen had the clout, still had the clout, to say, you know, this is what I want to do, and we did it. Not that I had a vote. But that did not give Phil Goff time to strut his stuff in front of the media. And one of the problems I think Phil has had, despite the fact he's been around for years and years, to the general public, he's quite one-dimensional. And I saw this thing on television a couple of nights ago out at his farm with his wife Mary, and I'm looking at it and think, why in God's name was that not done 3 years ago?
That's right.
Because he is kind of one-dimensional.
Question to both of you. With the iPredict market saying Labour Party vote on 28%, would you buy because Phil will get over 30% or short because Labour are in meltdown?
Well, as I say, I don't believe 26.
So you're holding at 28?
Which is what the polls are saying. I think 28 is more like. I think the pamphlets that Mike referred to will work their evil little magic.
Their charm.
They are very frightening. They're being sent to people in a vulnerable position. I mean, the first one saying that if you won't be around for your child's first birthday, unbelievable. The other one to all state tenants saying that if Nationals elected, they're going to lose their homes. Absolutely despicable tactics. It's what we see from the Labour Party every election. Mike is not the master of the politics of hate, because that's Winston Peters, but Mike is, because Mike is president, designed this tactic in 2005 when state tenants were told they'd be evicted with fake eviction notices if Don Brash became Prime Minister. There is no doubt.
Hang on, Don Brash was threatening market rentals for state houses.
That's not the same thing as sending to vulnerable people saying they're going to be evicted.
If you can't afford to
and you
pay for your house, you're going to get out.
And the thing is, you've got to give it, these tactics work. They did work in 2005, and Labour has become the master of the politics of fear.
So, I mean, we were talking about those people, that group of the polling population, difficult to get through. You need those kind of tactics. You need that cut through because the policies are quite frightening.
Well, for beneficiaries,
people back to work after.
National National doesn't like beneficiaries, and for all the John Key talk and McGee and Close and Paula Bennett's love of solo parents, I mean, there are they have cut back, certainly on educational opportunities for solo mums. The kind of educational opportunity that Paula Bennett took advantage of is simply not available now. So I think it's fair to wake these people up. You've got to remember, these are people living on the line of poverty. They don't buy the Herald. You really need to communicate with them.
And that's why it works so well, because while there is a lot of criticism on TV and in the media about the vile and despicable nature of Labor's tactics, what Labor counts on is that these people who are frail, socially frail, you've got people who are very vulnerable, some people have mental health issues, they receive these communications and they're not connected with other forms of media to know that Labor's lying to them. And
so
that's why Labor tells these lies.
They can't check Kiwi Blog and check the truth.
Well, the New Zealand Herald.
Hold on. But you're saying Labor 30 plus, surely 30 plus. They can get 31, 32.
You know, I'm a rusted-on Labor supporter. I think I've only ever once voted against Labor in my whole life. I couldn't stomach Richard Prebble in one election and voted for Sandra Lee.
Well, bless you.
And, you know, I hope that they do get 30 plus. And I think they're probably headed in that direction. But it's impossible. I say there's this great unknown block of voters who can participate and may not participate. It's just impossible to know.
We'll know on Saturday. Thank you, panel. Moving on, prediction 3. The market gives a Green National probability 16% and gives a Green Labour probability only 5%. By electorally flirting with John Key, have the Greens opened themselves to a terrible snooker if ACT manage to survive in Epsom? Mike, if ACT hold the balance of power, can't Key go to the media and say ACT wants 100% asset sales, but if the Greens agree to a coalition, we'll only sell 49%? Key could force the Greens into an arrangement using ACT as leverage, couldn't he?
That's theoretically possible, but I heard a very interesting long interview with Russell Norman on Radio New Zealand yesterday, and he was really dancing around. He's trying to have it both ways.
That's right.
And I think one of the things that could easily happen is that that Green vote deflates a little in the last.
And goes home to Labor?
It may well go home to Labor, but you know, I think Russell Norman's playing a very dangerous game. And the Liberals, the Green Party of Tasmania actually got into bed with the Liberal government of Tasmania, and the next election got slaughtered. So he must know that. I think he is actually a Tasmanian, isn't he, Matt? You're more likely to know that. He's
definitely Australian. He's definitely Australian, yeah.
But the Greens are actually could snooker themselves into a terrible position here.
Well, I think they could become one of John Key's options, just as the Maori Party was. And I mean, John Key was actually presented with in many ways, the perfect result last time, because he had ACT that gave him a majority anyhow, and he reached out and grabbed the Maori Party. So he had two majorities. He had a majority of the right and a majority of the left, if you like. Now, whether that is a fluke of the numbers, and as I keep saying to people, MMP is in many ways a lottery. If you put 20,000 votes on Winston's total last time, then you probably still have Helen Clark as the Prime Minister.
And Winston as Foreign Minister.
And he was a good one.
Yeah.
Oh, if you say so.
By including the Māori Party when he didn't have to, the real victory of brand John Key has been to spin everything he's done as moderate. A relationship with the Greens would be the ultimate political camouflage. Are the Greens politically sophisticated enough not to get played by the scenario?
Well, you know, I think it's more genuine than that, and I disagree that Russell Norman is playing a dangerous game. I mean, he's currently polling 12% in the landline polls, and on iPredict, we're picking he'll get 11.5%, so he's actually leading his party to a record result, which is hard. But look, one of the things that National, I think, will want to do, and I think voters probably deserve to get this question answered as well, is to sort of explore where the Greens really do fit, because, you know, the Greens claim that they're able potentially to work with both sides. They say they're not left nor right, but out in front. They say they're not socialists in the old-fashioned Labour Party sense. So it will be interesting to see where they go. Now, Russell Norman has a background in the Socialist Workers' Communist Party in Australia. Materia Ture, the other leader, began in the McGillicuddy Serious Party in the Aotearoa.
Feminist.
Yeah, right. So they come from the very extreme left of Australian and New Zealand politics. Now, what many people say on the centre right is they say, well, they're just watermelons. They're green on the outside, but they're actually red on the inside. Yeah. Now, what it will be interesting to know, and voters have a right to know, is that true? Are they just socialists who pretend they're environmentalists? And so if John Key does say, look, I can govern without you, but if you would like to assist in these areas, conservation, the environment, climate change policy, water and irrigation, I'm interested in your KiwiSaver fund idea, why don't you come into the government instead of ACT? And if they then say, oh no thanks, then I think New Zealanders will know that they are just, in fact, a sort of pseudo-communist party rather than an environmentalist
and John Key could blame the sale of 100% assets with
ACT.
let's
John
say
Key will never sell more than what he's promised in his manifesto. It doesn't matter what ACT says.
If his arm's been popped by ACT, if he says 100%, he could blame that on the Greens for the next 3 years.
Well, he could, if there are criticisms of the National ACT government.
You go, well, hey,
he'd
look,
say, well, I didn't want a
option.
National ACT government.
Right,
exactly.
Right,
so
right.
The Greens had better start thinking about this. It doesn't sound as if they have thought about it.
No.
And they shouldn't think it's just a cynical move, because Key does prefer the Greens, I think, than the ACT.
Because he knows that brash terrifies me.
Well, he doesn't like brash. So I think he'd prefer that. So it would be genuine, but it would also explore where they really stand.
Quick question to both of you. Would the Greens prefer a straight deal with the right via National or a combination of Labour, Mana and New Zealand First? Where's their preference?
I mean, that's the $64 million question. Sir Don McKinnon made a very interesting point on Q&A, a very wise man. He said he thought the danger of if the Greens got, and I'm not sure if he did this on camera, the Greens got into bed with Nationals, they'd actually split their party. Right. Because they are in two bits. They're a sort of environmental, professional, middle class bit.
The blue Greens.
Yeah, plus the the sort of socialist activist Sue Bradford types, and you saw
Russell told off.
Yeah, you saw that tension when they graffitied billboards.
Those people really should go to the Mana Party. Because that would be where they'd be more comfortable. As Sue Bradford already has.
And they may do.
John Minto and the others.
We're going to wrap the show. Matthew, your final prediction this evening is?
Final prediction is things are very, very close, and I do believe there's a good chance of that Labour, Green, New Zealand First, Mana Party government, which would be very difficult for Phil Goff. But here we go. I think Winston Peters is going to just miss out.
No.
I think his vote will get have a 4 in the front of it. He's currently trading at 4.1 on iPredict. Right. I think that's a buy, because I think it'll be more like 4.5, which gives an investor a 10% return in 3 days, which ain't bad.
Right. Mike, your final word.
Well, I'm starting to trend towards Matthews. I think it will be a near-run thing, if only because every MMP election has been a near-run thing. I'm actually going to bet on those numbers that Winston comes back. And I have 2 reasons for that. Polls of all sorts undersell the Winston vote. And the other point is, every time a superannuitant opens up his or her wallet and has a super gold card, they call them Winston cards.
I know, you see them in the Waiheke Ferry, don't you? When they're going wine tasting, they're all going for free.
Helen Clark tried to get into everyone's wallet with her pledge card in
1999. That's right, and Winston's done it.
Winston's done
that's right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Matthew. To my final prediction. How the 15% don't knows vote on Saturday will be the difference between a majority national government, either a right-wing or left-wing coalition. Key's plans to privatise ACC, sell assets and introduce youth rates of pay are all music to National Party ears, but the don't-knows who have resisted Key's challenge for 3 years may see that policy alongside his erratic justifications for gagging the media with the police, all the reason they need to vote strategically. This means buy New Zealand First up to 5%, Mana up to 3% and Labour over 30%. On the panel tomorrow night, I'm joined by New Zealand First leader Winston Peters and Mana Party leader Hone Harawira. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook accounts for all my latest election updates. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow, 7 p.m. for iPredict Election 2011, exclusively on Stratus TV. Until then, get trading.